another session brought to you by the Georgetown Capital in partnership with Antonio Menezes. That's me. I work as a risk analyst for a power and gas company in the UK. Prior to that, just a quick introduction, really, just to set the mood before we dive into the topic. Just before that, I was working as a data analyst for an oil and gas company where we used to track cargoes of crude oil and products, mainly gasoline, light naphtha. In the middle distillate, it used to be gas oil, diesel, and jet kero. So I worked around multiple commodities, really, with the power and gas being the newest one. There is going to be a potential to dive into the renewable sector as well. So the energy sector, it's a multiverse, so to speaking. So without further ado, let me introduce the topic for today, which is petrochemicals. And this topic is really coming out of the back of the previous sessions that we had on the crude oil markets and on the natural gas, likewise for the refinery operations, crude refinery more specific. Now, the petrochemicals is really, I want to say, the end product of the combination of all these three topics that we had before, from the natural gas to crude oil to the refinery. And we are going to see in one of the slides how that really fit into the overall frame. But I just want to bring you back, given the frame that Georgetown Capital might operate in terms of giving you the ability to join every single one of these classes, get access to the material, or if you're already an expert on this field, whether you want to have a specific one. If you just want to have a specific one, then this overview of the previous topics that we covered might be of interest to you, just to see how we actually got into the final, the petrochemicals session. Now, I must say that you don't have to be an expert in the energy sector. I tend to say that with Georgetown Capital and myself, we tend to walk hand in hand in these sessions, that I show you or I share with you a little bit of the knowledge that I have on these multiple topics within the energy sector. And through Georgetown Capital, we make that, or we give you the access to these topics, and we made you and we are the very first point of contact in case you have any questions on that. And do feel free, even if you have any questions in the future that might not span around any of these specific topics but within the energy sector, do get in touch with us. Enough of marketing for now. So in the previous sessions, when we cover the natural gas, we had to understand the natural gas and we had to understand the crude oil market. Now, with this petrochemical, in a little bit further ahead, you will see why you need to understand those. For the natural gas and the crude oil, we established that they have a similarity as of being a physical commodity. Natural gas and crude oils are very physical, tangible commodities. You can explore them, you can extract them, you can produce them through multiple stages. Where they differ, it will start from the physical properties. Natural gas and crude oil have multiple different physical properties that defines one as gas and the other one as oil. So we start talking about physical and chemical properties. The extraction and separation methods are different. For instance, you will feed crude into the atmospheric distillation to get multiple fractions, and we will see in these sessions that both crude and natural gas will be one of the main ingredients to feed into the petrochemicals, i.e. to be used as a feedstock for the petrochemical industry. And you see, the topic that I have is petrochemicals, an infinite sector, and that is purely on the basis of the range that the petrochemical industry really covers. I'm going to be repeating over and over again that every single product that you see in this session, every single product, every single family, or even the grade of the product, it is a topic of its own. That's just how wide the petrochemical industry is. Whether you talk about plastic, whether you talk about concrete, whether you talk about PVC, even the feedstocks, they are markets of its own. You will see that one of the feedstocks, for example, for the petrochemical industry is naphtha, and naphtha comes as a fraction from the crude distillation unit. Another feedstock is methanol. Methanol is it's a chemical, and you we will see how we categorize in terms of chemicals and in terms of clean products, which we depicted in the previous sessions. So do get in touch with Georgetown Capital, and they going to make you aware, or they're going to share with you the materials that we covered in the previous session. So in terms of gas productions, light fractions, they are produced at the very top. Two processes that undergo two main ingredients: high pressure, high temperature, that occur in a distillation unit. This is just a recap. We have not started just yet, but I want you to understand where we're coming from in terms to arrive to the petrochemicals. So you have the CDU, crude distillation unit, that you feed with you feed with crude is one of the feedstocks. In fact, let's point it out in the next slide, because we have seen this, and that's another reason that I brought this. Recap of the refinery operations. Oil refineries, what they do is to convert crude oil into usable products, i.e. a marketable product, and you can make a profit out of it. Refineries, they need to make margin, i.e. the price that they purchase the crude. If you want to make a positive margin, it has to be greater than the price that you sell your product. Or even if you want to put, if you're an accountant, then you can include the term cost of sales, the money that you actually spend buying the crude has to be less than the money that you actually spend producing these fractions. So for you to produce these fractions, you need to have into account that all these processes that you have through physical, which is the P, conversion, which is the C, or even thermal, which is the T, they cost money. They add on to your capex. So you need to be aware of that, and which sector really does petrochemical falls into. After going through the upstream, EMP, exploration and production, the midstream, which is the transportation, whether you're going to transport your crude, your natural gas via pipelines or not. Now bring that back into the chemicals. Chemicals, they have very extremely specific properties. Okay, so in the previous sessions we talked about different tankers. For instance, in the crude oil and in the refined product sessions, we spoke about the multiple range of tankers, from GP, general products, MR, medium range, LR, long range, all the way to the crude ranges: ULSCC, ultra large crude carrier; VLCC, very large crude carrier, to Aframax and Panamax sizes. Now, these vessels, because of the size of because of the amount of chemicals that they carry, which can are smaller than barrels of crude, or BCF for gas, for instance, they when you compare that to chemicals, they much smaller amounts, meaning that the tanks, they need to have the specific properties, they need to have the specific conditions, so that you can actually carry those chemicals without altering the physical or the chemical properties, because that is very, very likely that if the tanks are not the correct ones, then you are going to destroy the properties of the chemicals, which can easily be altered. Now, you feed crude oil, you feed the good stuff into the atmospheric distillation, and good stuff for me, coming from a petroleum engineering background, is the crude oil. I'm not here for a discussion of whether crude is good or crude is bad. For the refinery industry, crude oil is the good stuff. You desalt it because the natural process through which you extract crude, you don't extract crude on its own. You tend to extract crude. Crude is found with water and natural gas, and through a process of separation, you will see the gas separation, lighter fractions are separated at the very top, through it means that they undergo a lower pressure and a lower temperature. The fractionation, the for you to break that molecule and obtain the gas fraction, you require less pressure and less temperature compared to these heavy processes that are conducted under vacuum conditions. But let's just go over the whole kind of process of from the feedstock, the crude oil, to gas separation, all the way to the vacuum distillation unit, where you will distill the heavier fractions, which we call the atmospheric residue, which are left at the end of the atmospheric distillation. As you can see at the very top, I have highlighted the gas, because this is basically where we are interested when it comes to the petrochemicals. This is the part that we are interested the most, because all the feedstocks that we need for the petrochemical industry, they are produced right here at the very top of the atmospheric distillation, or the CDU, the crude distillation unit. So how does it work? So from the lowest temperature and lowest pressure, you have the gas boiling point, and all these type of properties that you probably heard before, or if not, you're gonna get familiar with in the previous sessions. So you take it to a gas separation gas plant. Within the gas plant, you have an intermediate, which is very likely that you're going to find basically within the refinery industry. You're going to find the amine plant. What an amine plant does is to basically remove H2S, hydrogen sulfide, from the crude oil. So gas plant is an amine plant, and that is going to remove the H2S, that is going to remove any toxic agent that you're going to find in the crude oil. Why do you have to remove those? Because as I mentioned, they are toxic. They will destroy the properties of your gas. But most importantly, they will destroy what we are going to see further ahead as the properties of your catalyst. Chemistry 101. Catalyst, two things: it will speed the rate of reaction, and it will provide an equilibrium to the reaction. These are the two main functions for a catalyst that you're going to see in your chemistry 101. And why do you need a faster reaction? You need a faster reaction purely on the basis that you don't want to destroy the properties of the chemicals that you are dealing with. A slower reaction might not be beneficial. So that is precisely, it's all about the end point, right? So you can see through the separation process of the gas, it goes to the amine plant, the gas plant, through a conversion process of polymerization and alkylation. These are very, very specific chemical process. So alkylation is a process whereby you synthesize the molecule to form an alkylate. And through polymerization, basically polymerization is making the chains slightly longer. So basically we're talking about polymers, and that is the end product for LPG, liquefied petroleum gas. And those are your the very light fraction that you see from the distillation. For example, you see within the LPG, you will see the ethane, methane, and you will see isobutane, for instance. But also much slightly higher than your LPG, you have the NGLs, the natural gas liquid, which will include the LPG, but it will also include things like olefins, which are chemical components or molecular components of the crude oil. Gentle reminder of what crude oil is. Crude oil is a mixture of hydrocarbons, and we tend to go by these by the name of there's this called PONA, PONA, which is paraffins, olefins, naphthens, and aromatics. Those are the molecules or the components that actually constitute crude oil. In a crude oil, if somebody asks you, crude oil is a mixture of hydrocarbons formed by paraffins, olefins, naphthens, and aromatics. Aromatics are your benzene. Benzene rings are chemicals. Your olefins, as you will see, they have multiple grades, multiple granularities, and your naphthenes are your double chains, also called ethenes rather, and they usually have a double chain. And your paraffins are your paraffinic, they are your paraffinic elements, to which we need to dig a little bit more into all these. I might be diving, based on my background in petroleum engineering and energy trading finance, I might be diving a little bit more into the chemistry side of it to explain the petrochemical, but this is precisely what petrochemical industry is all about. As the name suggests, is chemistry, the chemistry of petroleum, the chemistry of oil and gas. So you really need to dig deep into the petrochemical industry, and throughout these presentation, you will notice that I don't have specific numbers like I did for crude or natural gas. For example, I don't depict or I don't show the global flow of petrochemicals, the global flow of ammonium, the global flow of methanol, because those are very specific markets. But and because those are very specific markets, that is very hard to quantify on a general basis or even on a specific basis the flow of each one of these commodities of its own, these products of its own, which are markets of its own. So if you want to know a little bit more about a specific product, do drop us a text, do get in touch with us, and we can do that for you. But you will see that the petrochemical is very vast, so we're just going to spend a little bit time on that. So we have spoken about the top part, the gas plant, the processes, the conversion processes, and the thermal process. But from here, what you really want to take away is the LPG, because it's an important feedstock for the petrochemical industry. And obviously you want to take also the light straight run naphtha. You don't want the heavy straight run naphtha, because that requires, remember, capex money, capital expenses. You don't want to spend money on hydrotreating. Hydrotreating is adding hydrogen to treat heavy straight run naphtha, and you definitely don't want to go through the catalytic reforming or the of heavy straight run naphtha, because at the end of this process you're going to get a reformat, which is basically a blending component, and as you see, the end product is gasoline sweetening and blending for the production of automotive gasoline. But here we want to talk about petrochemicals, and we want LPG to produce your plastic, to produce your concrete, to produce your MTBEs, and all these are used in multiple range of industries, multiple products as well, multiple constituents of products. Final slide, or one of the slides, you will see that there's these crazy statistics that 95% of everything that you see out there in the world has petrochemicals, and I don't doubt. I just don't know why it's not 99.9%, since everything that we own, everything that we see, everything that we have around the world has some sort of a molecule in it. And if it has a molecule, that is a chemical. The physical, just to finalize on this slide, because this slide is of a very importance as well. You have the atmospheric distillation, which is a physical process, and the vacuum distillation, equally physical. Anything that is not distilled, anything that is not processed through the atmospheric distillation, goes to the vacuum, and vacuum, it goes through multiple physical conversion and thermal processes to break down into multiple usable fractions. But more of that, again, we did that in the crude oil and the refined. We also had a refined product section where we spoke a little bit more at length about all these, how the CDU works and how the refinery operation works. And the downstream, the combination of exploration and production, transportation, and the downstream through the refinery operations is basically where the petrochemicals sit, because the petrochemical plant or the gas treatment plant and amine plant, the whole purpose is to produce the LPG and so on. On to the next slide, something that you're familiar with from the previous session, but the one on the right is the amine treatment plant that I want to bring to your attention, and we spoke about in the previous slide. And you can see through a number of processes from the amine, which will remove the amine plant is useful for gas for treatment, and it will remove the sulfur H2S, as we spoke in the previous slide, through which you're going to have an LPG recovery, because LPG is the final ingredient that you actually want. And you can see the ranges of products that you have. You have C1, C2. C1, that's methane. C2 is ethane. C3 is propane. So you have a whole long list of chemical groups, and methane, propane, methane, ethane, and propane, butane. Those are they belong to a group called alkanes, and those alkanes are straight chains of hydrocarbons. Likewise for alkenes, those are double bonded, or you also have cyclical, like benzene, which is a chemical, and it is cyclical because it has a ring attached to it. IC4 is the isobutane. So you start seeing from the very top that you have agglomeration of C1 to C4, including the isobutane, which form the LPG, as we discussed before. And going down, so it's basically not a one-off, right? But remember, it is a combination of capex, the money that you're spending on applying temperature and pressure through all these processes, because within the reformer, which is where you process your catalytic reforming to produce the reformat. You can also go from your catalytic reformer through a process. Still, you have the gas plant or some sort of a treatment that is going to allow you to move through this network all the way through the production of chemical naphtha. And the chemical naphtha will be your straight run naphtha that is going to come through a naphtha stabilizer. And the rest of the process is really moving from the CDU, the crude distillation unit, applying a series of mechanism, a series of processes, chemical, physical, and conversion, like the one that we see on the left. I just want another recap on the reforming or platforming, because this is especially this platforming is very important, because you see the straight run naphtha, and it improves the octane number, converts straight chain hydrocarbons to cyclic. Those are the rings, the benzene ring, and benzene, it is an aromatic component, uses platinum catalyst. Remember when we spoke a couple of minutes ago about the importance of a catalyst and why you have to do the HDS, the hydrodesulfurization. You also have the HDM, hydrodemethylation, and then these two are processes for removal of metal and removal of sulfur, respectively. And you want to remove those because you don't want to destroy your catalyst. In this case, it uses a platinum catalyst, and it is usually associated to a base, but that is all chemistry if you want to dive a little bit more into this. Isomerization, that occurs at the very top, and just like you have the polymerization, you have the catalytic isomerization. If you want to move from the heavy straight run naphtha processes up through the gas treatment plant. But remember, it's all about the money. It's all about the money that you are spending. On to the next slide. What we see in the next slide is basically some of the feedstocks that we actually use. On your right, you're going to have just a little bit of a recap really of what we saw in the previous slide, because you hydrotreating, that's your HDS, hydrodesulfurization, that is a mouthful, but you can just call it HDS or HDM for hydrodemethylation. And the way that it actually works is by following this refining network or refining distillation network, through which you feed into the CDU, and then it goes into a reactor in the gas treatment plant. And within the gas treatment plant, you have multiple trays. One of the trays is the stripper, and the function of the stripper, as the name suggests, is to strip that H2S, the hydrogen sulfide, from the gas, because as you produce or as you extract gas from a reservoir, you will extract it with crude oil and you will extract with water as well, and those tend to be contaminated with sulfur, and those tend to be contaminated with metals. Yeah, I'll let you have a read or to recap on the multiple processes that you undergo on your own time, but these are just some of the this is just the explanation of some of the processes that you saw before in the one of the very first slides. Now, these might not be as visible to you, but I can always provide that on a separate note, but it is what it is said on the slide. Petrochemicals make things happen. And the reason that we went around on a loop to try to recap the crude oil, natural gas, and the refined products is because this is basically the feedstock for the petrochemical industry. Now, from the crude oil, or let's start with either the crude oil distillation, as we saw, you apply pressure and temperature, and you're going to get fractions like the naphtha that we saw before, and you're going to get the gas as well, because in like we said multiple times, in a reservoir you're often going to find gas, crude, and water. So, because you're going to find gas, crude, and water, and after we put the natural gas into a treatment plant, you're going at the processing stage. You get the NGLs, the natural gas liquids, which will involve the your LPGs plus the heavier fractions, the iso, butanes, and whatnot. So from the NGL, that's what you have here, precisely your methane. These are your LPGs, propane, ethane, and then on the naphtha. The naphtha has to undergo a steam cracking, steam and not catalytic cracking, because catalytic cracking will use it will use a platinum, but it's done at higher pressure, higher temperature, and it might crack your light naphtha. But instead of cracking at a heavier pressure and temperature, you want to steam cracking, and you want to use a catalytic reforming, which allows you to reforming is, as the name suggests, allows you to piece together smaller fractions into bigger fractions. And what does these olefins entail? Olefins comprises of compounds such as ethylene, propylene, C4, the C4 stream, like you will see here, the butadiene, butadiene, all these compounds, the styrene, the nitrines, the butalenes. These, every single one, every single one of these molecules or of these products are products of its own. That is something that I really want, you to understand, that you can build a whole market structure around naphtha, around ethane, LPG, and methane. You can also build an entire market around ethylene, propylene, uh, methanol. Pi stands for the pyrrolase gasoline, and we saw in the previous session that this is basically a blending component that comes from a clean product branch, mainly the gasoline. And gasoline, if you recall, that is one of the light fractions that is produced at the very top, of very desirable for the automotive industry, and it's basically what we tend to consider as a we use as a light distillate, right? Gasoline and naphtha, those are light distillates. From the ethylene, these are all the products that you actually get from consumer electronics, from reinforced plastics, automotive, detergents. So this is equally important to put into a global a global context where you tend to see, for example, today or not these days, you also have a lot of shortage of semiconductors. Semiconductors, those are materials that will involve one way or another petrochemicals, and countries like China, for example, are holding the upper hand um, on the international level because they're one of the main manufacturers of the global superpower of semiconductor producers. Likewise, APAC, the Asia Pacific countries like Malaysia, they also they also have a huge stock of semiconductors. And because of geopolitics, you will learn that geopolitics influences um, a lot, and is one of the main challenges that the petrochemical industry faces. Just to dive a little bit more into these challenges, really, um, these they tend to be regional or tend to be global. For example, in the UK, around 2019 or 20, around 2019 2020, we went through Brexit, and one of the challenges that we went through would be associated to regulation. As you know, chemicals, because of their very specific chemical and physical properties, they need to follow a specific or standard European Union at the time. They need to follow a regulation that was set by the European Union for European Union. But with Brexit, then everything became a little bit, markets became a little bit more segregated. So you have the European Union laws that might apply through transportation, for example, of these petrochemicals and the logistics of petrochemicals, the storage of those, or all the way through as an individual side, which is Brexit, things that affect the United Kingdom in particular, throughout internal legislations, and how those will be exported outside of the UK. So that's one of the main challenges and uncertainties related to regulations. Another one that I really want to bring in is equally important is interfuel competition, because within crude oil, natural gas, for instance, those feedstocks, they are used, the crude oil is used for industrial purposes, right? So you industrial purposes, the crude oil, you will distill into multiple fractions, and then you obtain gasoline. Gasoline is used in the automotive industry, gas oil and diesel for industrial purposes. And in many parts of the world, you still use diesel to power your vehicle. LPG is being used in the kitchens as a replacement, as a cheaper replacement for gas. But natural gas, though, is also used for power generation, and we're talking about electricity. So we are going through a very difficult period, which is a period in which we have to live through COVID, right? And a lot of sectors, they had to close their businesses. Industrial processes, they were heavily hit. Now imagine for an industrial consumer who needs those petrochemicals on a daily basis, but on the same on the same note, it will import the petrochemicals, but it will need to draw a very clear line on the electricity, the amount of electricity that is going to consume. And that, more often than not, will be billed through, will be billed through the cost of use of the natural gas, right? Because gas is used as the electricity generation. Then you are effectively expanding your costs. So you want to be able to balance that to what portion of natural gas you want to be paying for electricity generation, and what portion you actually going to refine the natural gas. So it is not mutually exclusive, right? Because in excess you can always offset, you can always sell your natural gas to eventually you can sell it to the grid in the UK. Whatever gas you produce in excess, if you don't use for a gas treatment plant to produce your LPG, you might as well sell it to the grid, and that is going to be used as for electricity generation. So that is one of the factors, right? Interfuel competition, and of course, not to forget, you will have the price of crude oil, the oil prices. As you can see, most of these fractions and products are really indexed to the crude oil, and just at the top you will see the multiple range of products that you can produce, from mobile phones to cars to shoes, bicycles, every rigid of soft object that you can think of. It has some sort of material. Wind turbines, furniture, construction, electronics, they all include some element of petrochemicals. This family is called the BTX. Very, very, very common for you to see traders moving BTX around the world from point A, origin A, to point B. From my time working as a data analyst, I know that a couple of refineries in Brazil used to produce, or they used to transport a lot of BTX, benzene, toluene, and xylenes to US pad 1. So the US is segregated into multiple pads. They have 5 pads: pad 1, pad 2, pad 3, pad 4, and pad 5. But the most used ones for imports mainly that I used to look, or you can also look from the export side, will be pad 1, which is East Coast, pad 3, which is the Gulf Coast, and pad 5, which is the West Coast. So I used to see a lot of flow of BTX, benzene, toluene, and xylenes from Brazil to the US, or even methanol as well. So those used to be carried by there might be specific companies such as Methanex. They have their own vessel fleet that will carry methanol under specific conditions, and you can see one of the products at the very top is MTBE, methyl tributyl ethylene, and that is important for fuel, for insulation. And you have products like MTBE and ETBE, which do refer to the previous sessions where we went through the clean products, and you saw the breakdown into clean products, from the family to the product and to the grade. And MTBE and ETBE, they fell under the blending components. Blending components at the end of the day will be blending, as the name suggests, which will fit into the session. And obviously the toluene, you have solvents, hair dyer products, they have a lot of solvents, and you can go through the list at your own time as well, but we can come back to this just to see all the processes. And basically what you use as a feedstock for the aromatics will be the gasoline. Pyrolyzed gasoline again refers back to the blending components. This is heavily chemical process. So we started from a generic approach talking about crude natural gas. Then we moved slightly into the downstream, where we generalized, and we in fairness, we broke down all the clean products, the dirty products, and the fuel oil, the dirty products, which includes the fuel oil market. We saw the respective constituents of those groups through the multiple granularity of the grades. Now we really dive in and digging into the chemistry of these products. So going to the next slide, I want to picture the very top of a generic refinery type, and this slide is just really a recap of what we saw, but it makes sense to include it again for those who just want to grab one individual session, either the crude oil, the natural gas, the refined products, or now the petrochemicals. And we saw that there are different types of refineries. So you have a topping, which is the simplest refinery that you can have, and you do distillation only, maybe some HDS, hydrodesulfurization. And here is basically where you are going to find all the gas processing unit. A hydroskimming refinery is you have a distillation and you have a little bit more complex processes like reforming again, piecing together smaller molecules into bigger molecules. And that's precisely what you do within a hydroskimming refinery type. And you go from the simplest to the most complex refineries that we saw, that involves a whole lot of chemical, thermal, and physical processes that allows you to break down the crude oil into fractions. And on the right, what we are showing is basically saying that um, we're basically saying that the higher value products, they are really at the top. And the way that I see it is, okay, every single one of the products that a refinery produces, they are valuable, but you can quantify that from a capex point of view. And that goes back to the concept that we saw, that if you can spend less amount of money on using on applying high pressure and higher temperature through less chemical conversion catalytical processes, then you can see that you're going to make a lot more or better margins for your refinery. Just a couple of notes then on the next slide, because what we saw previously is this group called the NPC, the non-petroleum clean. And at the very top, you can see how we tend to segregate these NGLs, natural gas liquids. It includes the LPG, and you can see the use of LPG, or you can see the multiple products, because we saw the different uses of LPG outside of the petrochemical industry to be used as a feedstock. We mentioned that you can also use LPG as a natural replacement for cooking gas, your normal natural gas. Rural areas, they tend to use LPG. It burns with a different type of flame compared to the natural gas, but at the end of the day can be cheaper. It can be more accessible in countries where it's actually easier to access the LPG. And you tend to buy LPGs in cylinders, for instance, and natural gas will be different, because natural gas you need to liquefy for example, to transport, and the LPG will be sold in cylinders, which are easily to transport. You also have chemicals like ammonia. Ammonia is a chemical of its own. That is exactly why you see that is segregated with excluded from a family of, or even a group. Ammonia, you will see in the slide to your right, that it is a chemical that you actually that you can trade. Is a market of its own. You have a lot of flow of what we used to call as UAE, urea ammonium, UAN, urea ammonium nitrate. That is a compound and is usually produced far east. Malaysia, for instance, Singapore, they tend to transport a lot of ammonia into the US. So you can judge from my previous job that I used to look at the world flows into the US, but when it came to gasoline, which is one of the products that I used to take care of, gasoline, middle distillates, like gas oil, diesel, jet kero, it would be weld to weld. So not a specific flow, but mainly those granular products. And at the very bottom, you see that specifically the product that I just mentioned, the UAN, the urea ammonium nitrate, and you can see the breakdown of the chemicals. So I have attached these ones here because acetone, styrene, again, those go back to these go back to these three that we saw. And what this one is saying is basically just looking at the different components. Let's pick benzene, for example, that you see. Let me fast forward a bit. You see, let's say, benzene being transported from China to, this is, yeah, from China to Colombia, and you can see how the units compare to crude. For example, in the previous crude session, we saw that we were talking even for crude transport, usually seaborne numbers, at least you have 40 million barrels of crude being traded on a daily basis. For products is 20 million, but judging by the numbers, this is a very small sample from June 2019 to November 2019, but you can see straight away that the numbers for chemicals are much smaller compared to the crude and natural gas. And that is, of course, a factor of the tankers themselves, the logistics, how to separate, how to segregate, how to insulate, and to prevent losses of the chemical properties. And also from a regulatory regulations point of view as well, right, that you need to comply with a lot of regulations to transport your chemicals. The last thing that you really want is to transport your chemical as such a long distance from port A to point B, and when it gets to point B is off spec and you lose your money and then you need to return. But because this is a chemical and it lost its properties, you can't really blend an off spec chemical because that chemical has a very specific property. Unlike, let's say, gasoline itself has a lot of specs, and when the gasoline remains on board for too long, or even renewable diesel remains on board of the tank for too long, so it can still go through a recovery process, I would say, that allows you to blend into many other allows you to blend, let's say, with diesel, or allows you to blend, for example, if you want to blend reformat with gasoline to produce a better spec of gasoline or a lighter spec of gasoline, you can still do it, but that you're going to have the same luck with chemicals, because an off spec chemical just lost its properties. So you can see through a tonnage. That's basically how we quantify the chemicals. You tend to say in terms of tons, like gasoline will be dollars per gallon, for chemicals will be dollars per ton. Gas oil will be dollars per metric ton as well, and of course crude is going to be dollars per barrel. Just a little bit of units in there for you. You also have products like caustic soda, that's the sea soda, and styrene. So let's pick methanol, benzene, styrene, and then refer back to the slide that we have. So that was methanol, styrene, and benzene. So methanol, you are going to use it as a feedstock. Methanol is an alcohol. Alcohol is a compound, and you compound such as alcohols and methanol, these are part of what we call organic chemistry. So it is another branch that for those for the chemists in the group, or if you really if you don't come from a petrochemical chemistry engineering background, then you can always research. It is fantastic. I remember when I was choosing between petroleum and chemistry, the reason that I chose petroleum is because I knew within petroleum I would still touch on heavily on chemistry, but chemistry chemical engineering could have been a little bit too broad for me, but petroleum, it would be unique to the oil and gas, but also include a broader view of the chemical industry. And where do we use styrene? I'm going to just to zoom in here for us to have a look at the styrene. You see multiple products in here, from methanol. You produce the MTBE, you'll also produce ETBE. The benzene is actually a feedstock. That is exactly why you see a lot of flow of benzene. Benzene is a heavily traded chemical, so I would say, although at the beginning I said that I tend not to put numbers because with chemicals is very hard to quantify on a global scale. I would say that based on the work that I've done tracking products, I would say that BTX, especially on the benzene is a very heavily traded chemical amongst all the others. And then if you just look at the family tree that we are following, benzene will be used for the production of styrene, but styrene is also traded. Styrene is traded. It has a specific and it has a specific use. So each one of these products, cumin, diphthis, if I'm not mistaken, we can do a little bit more research on it. This is some sort of a renewable biofuel, and you can use for multiple purpose as well. The MMA you can obtain either via benzene or via toluene, or via methanol rather, which is the methyl methacrylate. So all these are just mouthfuls. So pure chemists in the industry, they will just use the acronyms for these ones. So I do hope that by now you are starting to get a grasp of what the petrochemical industry really entails. If you are into the petrochemical industry, surprise surprise, you have a lot of work to do if you want to go general. But if you want to go specific, the good news is you still have a lot of work to do, because each one of these products is a market of its own, and each fraction that it produces or each sub-product that it produces, it is also a market of its own, and it has a very specific chemical and physical property that is going to be used specifically within a industry. Now, to go back to the slide that we were on the chemicals, just to give you an idea. So you see a lot of flows of Argentina, Peru, and China, and arguably the flows from Peru mainly to Colombia. So this is really South American flows. But then you can see China and the US, they have a huge amount of flows within that short period of sample as well. China mainly sent benzene or exported benzene going to France, and US styrene going to India. Now, it is important, of course, that each one of these refinery, because you are processing very specific chemicals, the refinery that is receiving these type of chemical obviously needs to have the ability to further process and to basically to accept this chemical, right? So you also need to take into account, and that is something that basically comes under market research conditions, right? So, and that falls under the few interfuel competition that we mentioned, being one of the challenges. If there's no global demand, let's say for styrene, or if there's no global demand for benzene, then there is no point of you producing or going through the whole process of producing benzene, and simply because there's not enough demand, and on the other side the refinery is simply not going to put the orders through. So that is an element that you need to play with, and that is a very common theme within the supply and demand of commodities, right? That for a given demand, there needs to be a supply, but the opposite is equally true. For you to supply, for you to produce, you need to have a market or an area of demand that allows you to ship your products. And it's been a very informative session. I really hope, and I want you to take, if anything, I want you to take from this session is the fact that the petrochemical industry is a very broad industry, and each product coming from the petrochemical industry is a product of its own, a market of its own, which requires further individual research. But the petrochemical industry, it's not segregated, although the products might be segregated and somewhat and at times correlated, given the sources that we use to given the feedstock. But I want you to remember that crude and natural gas are very much into play. So the general theme is, if somebody, there are multiple discussions out there whether crude is good for you, whether natural gas is good for you, even though there are multiple topics out there or multiple shouts to make natural gas a green fuel as a result of the COP26 that took place in Scotland. One of the main topics was to make natural gas a green fuel purely on the basis of its use, which is mainly for electricity power generation. So yeah, just be aware that if somebody tells you that natural gas is finished, crude oil is finished because those are hydrocarbons, remember of the petrochemical industry. Those are very important feedstocks for the petrochemical industry. Natural gas, crude oil is going to be used for the distillation into naphtha. Naphtha is going to be used, as we saw, through multiple processes as a feedstock for the creation of things like olefins, because it comes through the chemical process of a light straight run naphtha to create olefins being a group of ethylene and so on. So it's not about whether the crude oil and the natural gas are going to disappear, whether fossil fuels are bad. It's all about the conversion process and the usage into the petrochemical industry, because as we saw, the petrochemical industry really feeds into crude oil, natural gas, and everything that comes with it. Now, of course, just to conclude, what's next for the petrochemical industry? This is the statistics that we mentioned at the very beginning, that 95% of all manufactured goods are based on petrochemicals. And we saw a huge range of products from that petrochemical product tree that actually can be produced from the chemicals. And there is this concept that I will also bring to you of circular economy. The concept of circular economy, it's somewhat what a lot of people in the industry call from cradle to cradle rather than cradle to grave. Cradle to grave simply means that it is not recyclable. It goes from a cradle, the production, to a grave, the abandonment, and it can no longer be recycled. But rather, with petrochemicals, it is cradle to cradle, meaning that you have this concept of circular economy, the sustainability, affordability, and the security. Mainly, circular economy is related to the sustainability. So whatever you produce at the end of its life, it can always be recycled. Your phone, your furniture, your appliance, your microwaves, your textiles. So basically, everything that can be broken down into pieces and taken that apart, everything that you have into pieces on your phone, those are made out of petrochemicals. They have some sort of petrochemical in them, and that is exactly why there is this concept of sustainability around the petrochemical industry, which is very important. And you see there are a lot of benefits: sustainable solutions to energy saving and comfort, insulation, durability, lightweight and resistant composites. So and as we saw, a big but at the end, highly exposed to international competition, commodity prices, natural gas, the price of crude oil and electricity price as well, because we have that interfuel competition for generation. And on the right is really just a couple of sectors which make use of these petrochemicals. Of course, your food and beverage industry. So they use a lot of those chemicals to speed the rate of the reaction, i.e., catalysts. Remember the very catalyst that we spoke at the beginning. And within the energy sector, we spoke about all the chemical processes, those chemical processes they include catalysts. What is the ideal energy mix? With energy mix really comes the concept of sustainability. Sustainability brings the concept of petrochemical. So it is a never ending spinning wheel that we are talking when we mention the petrochemicals. Construction, housing materials, and mobility and communication. Again, your electronics, microchips, for example, semiconductors that we mentioned at the very beginning. So, all in all, really, I want to bring you back to the very first slide. And if we want to put this sector into words, the petrochemical, it is an infinite sector purely based on the range of application, the range of uses that you have, given the broad variety of product that you have. Each product is a market of its own, and it has properties of its own. It has been a pleasure really to being able to deliver this session. So stay tuned with Georgetown Capital to ask any questions if you have. So for me, this is it for today. It's been a pleasure once again. Thank you very much, and thank you.